Lord, you're welcome to my channel. I am Evangelist Bright Osaga. Today's topic is how to fellowship with God through prayer. Yes, how to fellowship with God through prayer. Prayer is one of the most important tools we use to communicate with God, commune, and have fellowship with Him. But most times, most believers don't know how to fellowship with God through prayer. They are just assessing God like prayer bring answers, prayer bring breakthroughs. They just, when they are in need of something, when they want something, when they want breakthrough, when they want deliverance, when they want healing, that is when they engage in prayer, or that is when they pray. If we know how to fellowship with God through prayer, we will know how to get access to God's presence and God's power. The essence, many of us, we are deficient of God's power and God's presence is because we don't know how to fellowship with God through prayers. Many persons just pray randomly, and maybe because something is bothering them in their heart, that is when you see them begin to pray. Prayer is actually beyond that. If I may ask you, how do you fellowship with God through prayer? Do you eventually feel God's presence while you are praying? Do you think there is this connection between you and God while you are praying? What actually prompts you to be praying? What are the things that lead you to start praying unto God? These are some of the things you should take notice of or ask yourself about in order for you to know if you are actually fellowshipping with God through your prayer, or you are just praying just to get your heart's desire or your prayer request. So we must know how to fellowship with God through prayer so that we can build the presence of God around us and know how to communicate with God rightly and know the plans of God for our lives. Many persons don't know the plans of God for their life. Yes, they read the Bible, they know that God wants them to prosper, they have the Bible knowledge. But I want you to know that there are hidden plans of God in your life that is not just merely written on this Bible. You need to build a relationship with God and fellowship with God through prayer in order for you to know those plans of God for your life. Someone like John the Baptist, we already know there was a written word of God for him that he will come in the form of Elijah. But Elijah was eating meat. He was eventually living a life. But John the Baptist, his own lifestyle was quite different from that of Elijah. He was told to eat honey and locusts, and for him not to comb his hair, like he was having a hair that was different from ours, for him not to cut it and for him not to comb it. You see that he came in the form of Elijah, but he understood the plans of God for his life through what? Fellowship, through prayers, and what? Communication. So you must understand how to fellowship with God through prayer if you want to feel God's presence, if you want to hear God, if you want to see vision, if you want to prosper on earth and know the plans of God for your life. So how do you fellowship with God through prayer? Is it when you are faced with challenges? That is when you know when to pray unto God. Is it when something is bothering you in your heart? That is when you will know that you will need to pray unto God. Is it when you need success? Is it when you need breakthrough? Is that only the essence you pray unto God? If you are doing this, you are not actually fellowshipping with God through prayer. Prayer ought to be a constant thing whereby we need to seek the face of God daily and pour out all ourselves unto Him so that He will renew us and continually renewing His presence and building His presence in our life. Are we together now? In Psalm 5 verse 3, David said something very important in that verse. He said, "My voice shall thou hear in the morning." It means that day after day, David communicates to God through prayer every morning. David tell God his heart's desire. He adore God. He praises God. He put God first early in the morning, communicating to God, telling God things about his heart desire. In fact, just rapporting with God. That's what the Bible is saying here. He said, "My voice shall thou hear in the morning. O Lord, in the morning will I direct my prayer unto thee and will look up." David here was saying that in the morning, day after day, he keep praying unto God, seeking the out of God and the plans of God for his life, communicating to God through prayer. He didn't just stop there. He said when he's praying unto God, he's not just praying randomly, just communicating, talking, as if God is not listening or God does not have something to tell him also. He said, "He will look up also." I will look up. It means that while he's praying, he's also expecting from God. He's expecting for God to communicate something to him. He's not just speaking, talking, for God to deliver him without paying attention to what God will say to him. You know, many of us, when we are bothered, when we are wanting something for God to do something for us, we keep praying, saying all sort of prayer points, saying all sort of words, communicating without even paying attention for God to speak to us, without even looking up, without even looking within, that for God to talk back to us. We just pray maybe because we need deliverance, we need something. We don't pray to really fellowship with God. We don't pray to really know the plans of God. We don't pray to really adore God, to really commune with Him. If you don't do this, you will always be deficient of God's presence and you will not be conscious of the presence of God. A prayer of fellowship will help you to be conscious with God's presence and will always help you to look up, as David said. Many persons, God is speaking to them. God is communicating to them because they are not alert in the realm of the spirit. I mean, they are not looking up. They are not conscious of God's presence through the prayer of meditation that David said in that Psalm 5 verse 1. He said, "Give ear to my words, O Lord. Consider my meditation." It means that even David also ponder on God's goodness to keep the consciousness of God within him, so that when God wants to minister to him, he will not miss the voice of God. He will not miss the word of God. He will always be alive because at this particular time, he is fellowshipping with God, communing with God, keeping the consciousness of God within him. If you pray with a sincere heart unto God, and you don't pray maybe because you are only faced with challenges, you are faced with problems, or maybe something is bothering within you, that is when you know to pray unto God. If you are doing this, these are a religious way of praying. This is not a prayer of fellowship. A prayer of fellowship is when you keep the consciousness of God in your heart and intentionally communicate to God often and often, whether everything is good, whether everything is bad, having that consistency to put God first and to always communicate to God in every area or time of your life. That is a prayer of fellowship. A prayer of fellowship is not always driven by problem. It's not always driven by circumstance It's not always driven maybe because something is bothering you in your heart, or you need deliverance, or you need healing. A prayer of fellowship is done day after day, whether the season is good and the season is not good, is to remain and keep communicating with God and looking up to God for God to communicate back to you. Daniel was a good example who engaged in the prayer of fellowship, who communicates or fellowship with God through prayer. The Bible said, in the morning, in the afternoon, in the evening, Daniel always communicates to God. Whether there is challenges or nothing, he always have ways to talk to God and fellowship with God. A man who consistently communicates with God in the morning, in the afternoon, and in the evening is not talking to God based on the circumstance at hand, but communicating with God, seeing God as his best friend, as his best companion. That is the prayer of fellowship. If you can always spend time to communicate to God, to speak to God, and not just pray maybe because when circumstance arises or when challenges arises. Prayer is not just talking to God when issues or problem arises. It's a process to rely on God and depend and communicate with God always, whether everything is good or not. We need to learn how to fellowship with God through prayer in order for us to build the presence of God and that consciousness of God within us, for us to always ascend and descend in the realm of the Spirit. If you have not learned how to fellowship with God through prayer, I want you to learn it today, because it will help you and help your spiritual life and your spiritual growth, and bring this connection between you and God. You will need to learn it, because the essence we are tossed here and there most times by circumstance and challenges of this world is because we are not having a prayer of fellowship with God. There was a day I was praying and God told me, he said, my people are just requesting, asking and asking without even fellowshipping with me in prayers. Many persons just talk and talk and talk and talk without even waiting for God to talk back to them. Prayer is not such. Your prayer becomes fellowship with God when you pray with a sincere heart daily, without coming to God just only for requests, just only for maybe for healing or for breakthrough. It is what you do day after day with a sincere heart. Believers, I tell you the truth, if you develop this habit, you will feel the presence of God. Your spiritual life and your spiritual growth will be strengthened, that you will not struggle to always receive from God, to see in the Spirit, and to hear from God. So this is where I will stop today. If this is your first time coming to my channel, please like this video and follow this page if you want more content like this. God bless you, and see you on my next teaching.